All right, so we are at chapter 15, and in this video will be unique in that it will be the only video on two chapters because chapter 15 is very short. It's only a few pages, not even worth doing an entire video on, so it'll overlap with chapter 16, which is quite long. So in chapter 15 then, which is called Saha, subtitled Saha, which is the Maltese saying for hello and goodbye, Profane and Pynchon and Stencil are getting ready to leave for Malta, but they have to go to Washington, D.C. first, where Stencil has to get their passports and get the shots and all this kind of stuff that he has to deal with in D.C. And meanwhile, Pynchon then and Profane are out having a night on the town, running around, getting drunk, rollicking. Then they get thrown in jail for disorderly conduct. Where Pynchon is recognized as a Navy deserter, because Pynchon is AWOL, as a matter of fact. So that's it. That's the last we see of him in this novel. But I think, if memory serves me right, he turns up in Gravity's Rainbow. So we'll see him again there. So that's it for him. And then Stencil makes his peace with Eigenvalue. He goes to visit him, and he's pretty sure Eigenvalue knows that he is the one who stole the teeth, V's teeth. But he doesn't say anything about it. And then Profane then says goodbye to Rachel. And that's it for that chapter. So then now in chapter 16, so they have set sail on the Susanna Squaducci. But Profane's old ship that when he was in the Navy was the Scaffold. And so it opens with the Scaffold putting into port at Valletta. And all these sailors getting out. These are new characters. We haven't met any of them. They're just sort of generic Navy sailors. They come out. But the whole point of this now is that the book has been written in a circle. It has come back like the famous Ouroboros, the snake biting its tail, which is the symbol for the mythical structure of temporality, as Jean Gebser describes it in The Ever-Present Origin. Time in the mythical consciousness structure moves in circles. That's the symbol for it. Whereas in the magical consciousness structure, which is earlier and before it, the world is connected into a single point-like unity where everything is connected to everything else. You have the Australian song lines of the Aborigines in Australia, where everything is magically interconnected with everything else, so that you can do spells over here and make things happen over here that resonate over there because everything is interwoven and interconnected. But in the mythical consciousness structure, which Gebser says then emerges during the Neolithic, with the matriarchal cults, or at least the matristic cults, I don't know whether they were matriarchal or not, but the goddess becomes a primary symbol. And then time and space begin to differentiate, and we get the generation of the world from the world parents, the sky father and the earth mother, which in Egypt is reversed. It becomes the earth father and the sky mother, the goddess Nut, who is the nighttime sky, or body full of stars, and the god of earthquakes and the earth is Jeb. And they separate. So we get the separation of the cosmic primordial unity of the magical consciousness structure, and it separates into a sort of twofold world that things start spinning into ever-recurring cycles, which is, of course, based on what Joseph Campbell calls the way of the celestial lights, which is the mathematically predetermined structure of the stars that go around in absolutely deterministic circles, and the priests know this, and they bring high civilization into being based on the astrological study of the stars, who are gods. Inanna, for instance, is Venus, who would be the earliest incarnation of Pynchon's V, I think, here. So he's tracing the archaeology of the goddess, and everything winds back up to Malta. And so the whole point of this scene, with all these sailors running around having fun, is that it returns back to chapter 1, when it opened with sailors putting into port at Norfolk, having lots of fun, going to the sailor's grave for suck hour, where they were sucking the nipples of the goddess, drinking her ale. So it returns back to that atmosphere of chaos and anarchy, but it's come full circle. And also politically now, it's come full circle because British soldiers are here present on Malta, since now we saw with the Fashoda crisis, which was the first of the V novels, that the British had moved in and taken Egypt, and all the consequences of them trying to build an empire and colonialize Africa to connect Cape Town with Alexandria and create a sort of vertical empire there. That's where it started Here now in 1956 with the Suez Crisis is where it ends for the British. They are forced to let go of Egypt by American interests. They are allied with France, and they're trying to manipulate the Israelis into invading Egypt, which they tried to do over this attempt of the Egyptians to nationalize the Suez Canal and claim ownership of it, since the Americans refused to finance the building of Nasser's Aswan Dam. So then they claimed the Suez Canal, and it caused this fracas. But the British finally, as a result of all this, had to let go of Egypt. So once again, we have come full circle too, from the first V story, which was the Fashoda crisis, all the way here to now the Suez crisis, which ends it. The British have to let go of Africa now and their empire. And so that's what the full circularity is here with chapter 16, with all these sailors running amok. And then Paula now, Paula and Profane show up amongst all this chaos. And Paula is briefly reunited with her husband, Pappy Hod, who's one of the sailors on the scaffold. She sees him, and she gives him the ivory comb that she herself, as a child, took from V on Malta when she and a bunch of other kids disassembled V, pulled her apart, and each of them took all these little souvenirs from her body. She took the ivory comb, and so she gives it to Pappy Hod and tells him this bullshit thing about being a sort of Penelope. I'll go to the States and I'll wait for you and I'll be faithful. She's a whore. I mean, she makes her living as a whore, and she's trying to tell Pappy Hod that she'll be faithful to him. And the reader reading this is kind of like, there's some bullshit going on here. Plus, we don't know for sure about where she got the comb, since her father, Fausto Maestro, said that he witnessed all the kids disassembling V and he didn't recognize any of them. So how did Paula, his daughter, then get the comb? So we have all these little things that are never resolved in Pynchon. And that's the point of it, the suspension of the formation of truth. Pynchon refuses to allow it to ever fully form and cohere. This is Heidegger's Clearing, in which, in his essay on the essence of truth, in the clearing, entities now manifest themselves in fuzzy ways, in incomplete ways. And so truth is no longer a matter of binarity, of truth and falsehood. Either this is true or it isn't. It's a matter of degrees of unconcealment, aletheia, in which entities unconceal themselves within the clearing, which is simply the metaphysical space of encounter in which entities encounter each other and make sense out of each other through a presupposition of a particular understanding of being. So that's what's going on here, this clearing that's opening up, that's in a fuzzy way. This is the postmodern world where truth is never resolved. It's always suspended. So then Paula is briefly united with Pappy Hod, and then she meets her father, Fausto Maestro, and Stencil and Profane go briefly to meet with him. And Stencil is still on his quest. He wants to find out what has happened to V. He doesn't fully believe that she's dead. And so he has a conversation with Fausto Maestro, and he says, do you know what happened to her glass eye? The glass eye with the clock face on it. Do you have any idea about that? And Maestro tells him, well, there's a girl who is rumored to have the eye, so I'll give you her address. And then Stencil goes to meet her, and she says, no, I threw the eye into the sea. And so there's another dead lead there. And so he's wrestling continually to try and figure out what is going on with V. And so he's referred to Father Avalanche, who was a character that I did not mention in Fausto's Confessions, the Confessions of Fausto Maestro, Paula's father. Father Avalanche was one of the main priests during this period. So Stencil goes to see him. And then Father Avalanche surprises him by saying he wants to know what happened since his father, Sidney Stencil, died on the island in 1919. And there'll be an epilogue after this. So there'll be one more video covering the 1919 epilogue. And then Father Avalanche tells him, well, actually you should talk to my predecessor, Father Faring, to which Stencil raises his eyebrows. Father Faring, you'll recall, was the character who was fucking the rats. Veronica the rat under the sewers when Benny was hunting alligators. So in a way, it looks like Pynchon is trying to tie everything in together, but he doesn't. He tries to give the appearance that things are coming fully together, but they don't. He never fully commits to here's what happened. As we'll see in The Crying of Lot 49, he never tells you whether the Trastero exists or not. You figure it out. It's up to you. If you want to believe that the Trastero exists, there's evidence supporting it. There's also evidence supporting its non-existence. He just refuses. This is the postmodern world where grand meta-narratives are no longer trustworthy. They're no longer allowed to cohere and organize things into experience. So he thinks about Father Fearing, and he goes back and he talks with Meistrel about Father Fearing, and then finally he gets one more clue. As the chapter winds down here, he gets one more clue. He leaves a note, which Meistrel finds on Benny Profane's belly while he's sleeping off one, that says, "A shipfitter named Aquilina has intelligence of one Madame Viola," so another V, oniromancer and hypnotist, that is, she interprets dreams, who passed through Valletta in 1944. The glass eye went with her. Casara's girl lied. V used it for an hypnotic aid. Her destination? Stockholm, as is Stencil's. It will do for the frayed end of another clue. Dispose as you will of Profane. Stencil has no further need for any of you. Saha. And so that's it. That's the last we see of Stencil, disappearing into the night, as it were, chasing down yet another pointless clue that will lead him nowhere. So that's it. So nothing changes in this novel. Nothing is learned. Nothing is resolved. Nothing happens except a bunch of what-ifs. That's the suspension of truth in postmodernity. It's not allowed to cohere. And then finally, Profane bounces once again, and he's described wearing the same exact outfit in the first paragraph of the novel, the cowboy hat, jeans, and a t-shirt. Exactly, he's dressed exactly the same, and he bumps into yet another girl, Brenda Wigglesworth is her name, who writes poetry, bad poetry, that's an imitation of Whitman. She reads him some of it. He's like, yeah, that's good. All right, yeah. And she's like envious of his experience. And she says, you've done so much more, boys do. He says, what? You've had all these fabulous experiences. I wish mine would show me something. Why? The experience. Haven't you learned? Profane didn't have to think long. No, he said, offhand, I'd say I haven't learned a goddamn thing. And that's it. He's learned nothing. He has changed not the slightest. So Pynchon is coming in here and disrupting all the previous narrative structures for the whole point of a novel, a Bildungsroman, let's say, of the type of a Thomas Mann novel in Bud Brooks, or The Magic Mountain, or The Confessions of Felix Kroll, where you trace the life history. It goes back to Goethe as well with Wilhelm Meister, where you trace the life history of the evolution of a person who becomes what he is, to put it in the words of Nietzsche. But that never happens in this novel. Profane is exactly the same at the end of the novel. Stencil is exactly the same. He has not resolved the mystery of V. Nothing is resolved. This is the postmodern deconstruction of all the traditional narrative structures that are now being liquefied and melted down. At the same time with William Burroughs, who is coming along with The Naked Lunch and the Cut Up Trilogy, simultaneously liquefying and melting all the structures of the novel, plot, character, coherence, setting, time, and place. All of that is dissolved into a kind of flowing literary magma in the novels of William Burroughs, who is right alongside of Pynchon here, dismantling and deconstructing all these traditional narrative structures. So the novel's in trouble here as a form, I think. It's being disrupted. It's like a neural disruptor has entered into it and disrupted all of its cognitive structures, and it's failing to function as it used to function. A novel of learning in which, and they always tell you this like in a creative writing class, your character has to learn something. The main point is that the character by the end of the novel or story or movie is not the same as he or she was at the beginning. Pynchon says, Who says they can't be the same? Who says they have to change? So he resists all these cliched narrative structures and refuses to play ball. And so that's one of the things I like about him. Okay, so we have one more video on a very long epilogue here that is set on Malta in 1919. So we'll get to that next.